This week we're doing something slightly different. I mean, to date, most of playing the unicorns has been me presenting something I wish I knew when I was 21, or actually in this case 17, starting as a first-time entrepreneur that I now know, and it's more about like learning. But I've come across a number of fascinating people over the last few years, and perhaps none more than the guest we're going to have today, Christian Angermayer. And I think we're going to have a really, really fun chat about everything from psychedelics to crypto to being interested in many different things to happiness to whatever. And so, I guess with that, we'll get going with the formal introduction for today. So, welcome to Playing the Unicorns, episode 14, a conversation with Christian Angermayer. Well, Christian, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Super pleasure.
So, I mean, it's interesting and perhaps a shame that you're not as well known as perhaps you should be in light of like all your amazing accomplishments. And so, maybe
Oh,
you should
wow.
take
Yeah.
a little, like, if 1 or 2 minutes, like, give a little bit of your background, and then we can have the conversation go from there.
Okay, so where do we start? I'm German, which someone will realize anyway, because I still, I think, have a slight German accent. Living in London, though, I started as an entrepreneur, so that's where my heart is. So I started a company with 19 with two professors of mine in biotech, which randomly, in terms of nobody expected it. Yeah, it was like it became really big. So that's sort of was my first wealth creation. And then I somewhat switched semi on the investor side, but as we discussed actually in the prep talk, like you and I are something in between. I'm still in my heart, I'm an entrepreneur, and we still actually start companies ourselves. But we mainly I would say, I'm now an investor investing in other amazing entrepreneurs. What else is to say? Like, I live in London. Before COVID, I would have said I'm traveling a lot, yeah, and I spend like also a lot in the US and a bit in Germany. I guess I will resume travel, maybe not as crazy as before, because I think we all sort of a little bit reconsidered like how to sort of structure traveling and all of that. But in generally, I spend time in Germany or German-speaking countries, live in London, and then a lot in the US. And my main investment themes are biotech, which is also the sector in which I started more than 20 years ago. And within biotech, as you already mentioned, it's mainly longevity and happiness / psychedelics. We also do other stuff, but this is sort of our main focus, our passion. Then the second big vertical is fintech, insurtech, prop tech, and crypto, which obviously made my last weeks very happy. And then the third big vertical is what we call deep tech, which is anything from artificial intelligence, actually a lot of space tech, which I'm really excited about, robotics and that stuff. And then on the side, I like to be creative. So once in a while, I produce movies. And so I have a little bit of an entertainment, let's call it business, but it's sort of something in between a business and a hobby. But we're actually doing quite well also in the movie business, which is a very challenging business. So that's the overview. We can talk about anything. Obviously, psychedelics is always what everybody loves.
I
But
think we'll get
you
there,
tell me.
but taking a little step back, how did you start in biotech? Did you like study medicine, or was it like total happenstance that decided, okay, I'm going down this path because I met these amazing people? Like, because even the origin story, I think, is relevant because it shows perhaps some elements of random walk or frankly deliberate choice. I actually don't know.
It's actually a very good question, because a lot of questions, when you tell me, okay, how did you, we can do the same, by the way, in some minutes about psychedelics, like a lot of stuff in my life came of what from the outside people would say random or, yeah, or coincidence, while I personally, but that's my personal belief, I'm very spiritual. I think if you sort of have an open eye, yeah, things happen at the right time, positive things, and you just need to sort of seize the opportunity, but it's not random. So I believe a little bit more in like the law of attraction, that you attract positive opportunities and you just need to seize them. And in that case, it was like, if I go back, and it also shows how bits and pieces really come together. Like I had a scholarship in high school for science. And so the two guys, they didn't even fully remember I then started a company with, were actually my tutors in high school, in like a science. So then I started studying 2 years later, and I studied economics. But so I re-met them, and we were like, so they were telling me, I was like, hey, what are you doing if you're not tutoring little Christian? Yeah, and it was always what hopefully I'm still always interested in people, what they're doing, like whatever. So they told me about this idea they were working on, and meaning they were extremely, from my 19-year-old point of view, they were like, oh my God, these are the gods in biotech. They were literally the only biotech people I knew. Yeah, and the idea sounded very legit. So I always have to admit I did not understand all the details because I was 19. Yeah, but I think I have a good, quick feeling in general. As I would say, it's one of my talents, like for business models, like, and for, is this something? Yeah, and I was like, look, this sounds amazing, and I trust you because you are like these famous biotech guys. Yeah, we should do that together. Yeah, and this is how we started the company together. Which was hindsight then. It didn't even have a name back then, but hindsight, one of the first big companies and applications in what we now call RNAi technology. Yeah, and then it was this super wild ride. We IPO'd 3.5 years later via a SPAC, which is actually funny because like
Yeah, they're definitely a bubble in SPACs right
yeah,
now.
exactly. So we did a SPAC merger. So we were the target, merged into a SPAC called Alnylam, which then kept the name. So we didn't take our name, and they acquired more companies. So Alnylam now is a $15 billion company. Parts of it is what I started or helped building back then, and then they acquired more stuff. But that's the beginning. So I always think it's like, and I would actually advise every entrepreneur, whatever. Like I really believe in that. If you approach your life with a sort of certain amount of positivity and openness, yeah, I always say you need an open heart and open mind. Then opportunities present yourself, yeah, and I think they are presented to more people than people actually think. They just too blind to normally realize
That
it.
said, you normally or have a very, we I think we take a portfolio approach, and we'd like to have our hands in lots of little pies and like be involved in many things. And I think it's partly driven by underlying curiosity. But most people, if you ask them what is the proper model of entrepreneurship, is like you need to be solely dedicated and passionate about one thing and do that day and night and like give your soul and body and mind to it. And in fact, in other realms of the world, hyper specialization is super rewarded, right? Like if you're good at 5 sports, you're not as rewarded as if you're the very best at basketball or volleyball. And I suspect so that in a way we're like more like polymath or dabblers. I mean, I don't know to what extent it's dilettantes versus polymath. And how do you reconcile that with like the fact that most people say no, find one thing and be the very best at it?
Well, I wouldn't say it's wrong, by the way, because if I back a great entrepreneur and then he or she should do sort of just this one thing. So I think it's not wrong. This is why by the way, I think one super important thing is for anybody in life, meaning not just for investors or entrepreneurs, is really how the Romans said, know yourself. Yeah. And know what makes you happy. So I'm always like, my luck was that actually, because my sort of first company I founded was a big success, technically I never had to work ever again. Yeah. So I'm always telling myself every single morning, if I'm stressed or whatever, Christian, don't forget, you want to do that. You can stop it. I can stop it tomorrow, go on an island. I don't want to, yeah, because I love what I'm doing. But this is why it's so important to really know what you love, because just I think then you're happy. So in this, I sort of constantly did, and like actually there was sort of a finding phase in the first, I would say, the first 10 years of my professional life, where I was actually thinking, do I want to be an entrepreneur? Yeah, because I would say, if I analyze myself, I think I have some character traits or some abilities which are really good for an entrepreneur. But then I also had to realize, oh, but I do have some, and it's very neutral. I have some character traits which are not good for an entrepreneur. And the main one is that I want to do a lot of things.
Yeah.
I want to have a portfolio. I'm super curious. Some friends always funnily say Christian is like a puppy. You throw a ball in the air, and I'm like, oh my God, this is the most beautiful ball I've ever seen. Like, I get easily excited, which helps me as an investor because I'm constantly looking for new things. So this is why I finally actually decided, like round about 10 years ago, to really say, look, okay, I should be technically an investor because I want to have a portfolio. But then if you compare me to other investors, and maybe similar like you, because in my heart I'm still that entrepreneur, I'm extremely close to the portfolio companies, extremely hands-on, and sort of I try to a little bit get both, but like I wouldn't run a company. So that's actually what I'm not good. I think if I run a company, I would just be mediocre, because then exactly the problem of being too diversified would
Yeah, no, I think there are moments where I have like Elon envy, and I'm like, I could do, I'd like to be running a ginormous company that is visible and like making impact on a daily basis. Because in a way, when you're an investor, you have an impact, but it's less direct. It's indirect through people, but it does give you a lot of leverage. And I think like you, I get my entrepreneurial like stint out of it because every year I build companies. So as the executive chairman, not as CEO. And I think that's a pretty fundamental distinction because you can focus on the strategic issues of like fundraising and hiring the best people and helping with product or the things that you like. But it's a completely non-traditional model. I mean, definitely not like what people would say is the norm, and not nor what we look for in our entrepreneurs. We want our entrepreneurs is this is their life mission. Let's do this and nothing else.
And there are people who love that, by the way. I think again, it always comes down. You need to find in yourself and then in other people what does really fit, makes you happy. And funnily, we're so similar. Sometimes I also have Elon, and we're like, okay, he's doing that really well. But then I remind myself, okay, but I wouldn't be happy doing that. I would like to have it for a moment, but it wouldn't make me happy.
Exactly.
So, and the worst thing is, by the way, comparing. Like, you should always find yourself and then just do that, like, and not compare your concept.
No, first of all, absolutely, you should do what makes you happy. But what's interesting is you and I are very privileged because we love entrepreneurship and technical things, and those happen to also be extremely rewarded by society. What if you're fascinated by art history or music and as good as you may be, society doesn't reward you? Like, do you think people should actually just then only follow their passions there, even though they may have trouble like making rent and paying for food and raising their families? Because sometimes it feels like a double-edged sword. Like, should that be your hobby versus should it be your day job? For us, it could be your day jobs. Our hobbies are our day jobs, but we're extraordinarily privileged, and I'm very aware of that every day. And so I'm not sure to what extent that's a good advice or not good advice.
Good question, because you're right. Meaning we need to be careful because we're coming from that place of privilege. On the other side, I'm always telling if I go back, I'm not coming from a privileged background.
Right.
So it's 100% self-made. And if you would have seen me with 10, you wouldn't have think that's the way he's going. And my parents didn't want to go that way. I mean, they were like, oh, why aren't you becoming a doctor and like having the house next to us? So again, it's very complex because listeners or viewers might say, it's so easy for him to say. But I deeply believe if you're doing what you love and have this positive approach and then reconcile it, obviously, with sort of, even I have maybe wishes I would like to do, which I can't. And I had to sort of, meaning I was always, my favorite example is like, I had on my list for life achievements, I was like, I would like to be a good actor. Yeah. I really suck in that. So I have decided to go that way and never have succeeded. And sometimes you need to say, look, when it was like with 14, 15, like I was like, okay, this is not me. And I think it's sort of this mixture. You need to follow your passion, but with a little bit also about realistic perspective about yourself. Like, can I do or can I not do? Does it make me happy? Sure. But even beyond, can I succeed? So it's not a completely free thing but again, spiritually, I would say we decided, but it's not going very in another direction, but like I always tell myself, we decided before we come in this life, what is our setting? Mm-hmm. And it's very hard to change the setting. It's rather like within the setting, which I believe you gave yourself, you should sort of excel, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The What's interesting is like, yeah, it's not as though when I was 10, I was like, oh, I've done a macroeconomic analysis and technology is where I should be in 20 years and therefore I should love in computers. I just fell in love with computers and like it happened to be something that 20 years later or 10 years later was highly rewarded by society. So there is that element as well. But no, I totally get it. And frankly, in general, if you do what you love, you're going to be, even if you don't have the best financial outcome, you're probably going to be much happier about your day job and your life. And there are probably more opportunities that can come out of it, especially in today's world with like the online economy, the like cameos or whatever the world. You could always find ways to do it. Actually, non sequitur, and I didn't mean a monologue here for a second, but as a kid, I was like, I had delusions of grandeur. I wanted to be like Alexander, or maybe more Octavian or Augustus, because I'm like, you build something that transforms society, creates peace, and lasts for hundreds of years.
Oh my God.
And then I realized, so I had in a way political ambitions, and then I look at today, it's like the last thing I would ever want to do is politics. It is so like mind-bogglingly numb. The day job is horrible, the process is horrible, and possibly because of what it entails, you wouldn't be able to do what you want to do, and probably have to not corrupt yourself, but like definitely compromise on your ideals. And so that's the last thing I would ever want to do.
By the way, this is so funny. And by the way, I was viewing like we did not like train that or whatever, because it's exactly how I always thought. Additionally, I always thought, Jesus, like people like Alexander the Great, they did it in their 20s.
Yes.
This like they all did it so early, so I had completely FOMO. And then I came to say, my additional why I would, for example, I'm super interested in politics, but exactly what you said. And additionally, I think it became, meaning politics always was a game of like, oh, you have to sort of, meaning this is my party, this is your party. This was always very confrontative, and I can't live in a confrontative world.
Yeah.
I actually kind of want to be liked by everybody. I can't deal with confrontation, but especially what we've seen yesterday, the last 10 years, I think politics became so hostile, meaning I would die in that environment within a day. So actually, not for me.
So, I mean, transitioning or shifting gears a little bit. So how did you end up being in the world of psychedelics, and what role has that played in your life, and why? And it's also one thing to say, oh wow, this is amazing, and then like, oh, let's build a company out of it, right?
Yeah. So, okay, this takes 2 minutes because it's again, by the way, it's a crazy story of one coincidence after the other, which then actively led to that. So I always start with that because it's like I think it's important, because I'm not coming from, neither actually. Some people who come to psychedelics coming from a point of searching for a solution, like because they're depressive. So I was always very happy. So it's actually, in terms of, I was always fascinated about happiness, but for the reason why, because, and I think I completely give that to my parents, with whom I love and I have an amazing relationship, that somehow they did something in my youth, I think, which made me very happy and sort of content. Yeah, I had an amazing childhood, completely, by the way, without any sort of big money or whatever. I come from a very basic family. I grew up, which I, by the way, think is one of the reasons, I grew up in a 90 people village. You know, it was like in a movie. Like I was summer, winter, I was outside. Like, guys, it was very rural in the sort of super rural area of Bavaria. Anyway, so I was always happy, but then I realized early that people are not. A lot of people, I would say, some are depressive, but like I think the biggest part of society is neither depressive but nor happy. It's just something like okay. So I did, for example, years ago, before I came to psychedelics, a movie which I'm really very proud of still. It's called Hector and the Search for Happiness. And so I was always fascinated by that. Yeah.
Is it Hector as in Achilles and Hector?
It's the same name, but has nothing to do with it. It's just like the character is called Hector. It plays in our time. It's like what with Rosamund Pike, Simon Pegg, like big cast, and it's about, funnily, a psychiatrist who realizes that he can't help his people with SSRIs, and is going around the world to find out what really makes people happy. It's a very feel-good movie. So I was always interested in happiness. The second thing, which I think helped me to sort of get to psychedelics, was that I'm completely against for myself, not as an activist, but I'm against any form of actually drugs. So I've practically never drank alcohol in my whole life, which is very weird if you come from Bavaria. I've never smoked a cigarette. I've never smoked a joint, actually. I did nothing like that. And because I always thought, okay, Christian, you're happy and you're not dumb. So you sort of have the perfect thing, equilibrium in your mind, like don't risk it. That was also. Then 7 years ago, friends at a dinner placed me next to a very famous scientist who deals a lot with drugs in general. Their idea actually was that he could ease me into drinking alcohol. So this was their idea. Like today, it was like 8 years ago, we're gonna make Christian drink alcohol, and he can tell him that Christian is not dying. So obviously, I know that you can drink a glass of alcohol and not die. So we had this fun conversation, which at the very end he said, "Look, actually, every drug you know, legal and illegal, alcohol, heroin, cocaine, whatever, it's all really bad." Yeah, but alcohol is actually the worst, by the way, but it's another discussion. The only thing you should try is actually magic mushrooms. And I was like, you're crazy. Yeah, this is an illegal drug. I'm not going to try it. Yeah. So, but he was like, look, I have all the research. You're doing biotech. Let me send it to you. So that was the beginning where I heard about it for the first time. So I was reading stuff and I got really interested because of this happiness angle. And then 1 year later, I was on a Caribbean island with my best friends, which is super important, set and setting. And they had magic mushrooms. And I was still very nervous because I'm actually a coward in that health stuff. But like, I was like, okay, you read now a year about it, let's do it. And short version, I mean, I told this numerous times, but it's like the single most important thing I've ever done in my whole life. So nothing comes close. I was like, in any form.
Why would you say that? Thank you.
Well, I think if you have done it, it's an hour long because it's so outerworldly that it's very hard.
But you did just so I guess you did 1 gram, like one site, or did you did like a hero's journey, like 3 or 5 grams?
It was in the middle. It was I think it was the first one was 2.5 to 3. So a kind of strong trip, but no.
That's pretty strong, especially as a first time. I mean, that's quasi hero's journey.
It was not a softy dose on the beach. It was really deep, like mystical experience. Like, I mean, I'm always so careful because if I would use now words like, "Oh, I met my soul and I met God," then so many people, I think talking about religious context is extremely complicated because everybody associates something. If I use the word God, any viewer has a very strong personal idea about it, and it's maybe not what I want to say. Yeah, but it was very mystical, very spiritual, very, very, very positive, which just like, and also my experiences with psychedelics, if I would give you examples now, they would sound extremely banal. Banal, I think is the English word, or extremely simple. But I think the beauty of psychedelics is that you learn some simple lessons, which you could actually read in any book of Deepak Chopra, meaning I could tell you, spend more times with your parents. Love is at the end the only thing which counts, all that cheesy stuff. Yeah, but like you realize it on a level where it sort of goes straight in your sort of behavior change. Yeah, if I tell you, look, you should see your family more, you should spend, you're like, okay, and then it goes in Germany, we say it goes in here, out here. Yeah. But like on a psychedelic trip, you learn sort of these basic wisdom, but it hits you in a form that you keep it and you come out of the trip and you really change your life. Yeah. And so that's maybe the short summary.
So what's actually funny is you and I have had a very similar origin story here. I've actually never shared this, at least publicly, but I also...
Okay, and now is the time.
So now's the time, yeah. So basically, I never drink, never smoked a cigarette, never did like pot or anything. And kind of like 6 years ago in my case, started doing, multiple people said, hey, you need to consider this or try this. And I'm like, hey, like you, same thing. My brain is my comparative advantage. I have super high IQ and also super happy. Like I was, and like you come from I studied happiness, actually. I studied both the economics of happiness, like the Alan Kruger and Blanchard and Oswald, but also like the psychology of happiness, the Dan Gilberts of the world. and was writing and like practically always was by default grateful and optimistic. And so I'm like, why mess with a good thing? And came across, frankly, the nut toxicity index, and I'm like, oh my god, like this makes absolutely no sense. Like alcohol, tobacco, and frankly sugar, which are all addictive and highly toxic, or illegal. And then we have these substances that people like Aldous Huxley and the philosophers of yesteryear said are amazing or illegal, even though they're non-addictive, non-toxic, and frankly not that pleasant for the most part. It's not as though something you want to do on a regular basis. I just think they're interesting. And I guess in May 30th of 2015 is the first time I did psychedelics, and it led me down that rabbit hole. And I thought, well, like, this is fascinating as well.
Yeah. By the way, Vinny, I don't want to mess the recording up. So I was thinking if I should share the screen, because what you said was exactly this is what the scientists who I met
Share your
1
screen.
year
I
before
can
told me.
I can put your presentation on.
Well, I don't know, not that but it's these favorite these.
Let me know if you have it, Andy, and I'll put it on.
Yeah, no, it's these, because I think it's so visually impressive. Is I'm trying. So this, what you mentioned is the chart. How do I? Yeah, I know. I just looking up the chart. I think it doesn't really work because I can't figure out how I get the chart up here.
No matter. Yeah, people can Google it, right? Like the nut toxicity chart, and not NUTT.
Exactly. Yeah, David Nutt chart, nut toxicity chart. It's so visually striking how bad alcohol is, yeah, how bad the rest is, and then at the very end you have the practically non-toxic psychedelics, yeah. So coming back to your question though, how did it become a business? So it was already after my first trip that it was so positive that I was like, okay, I mean, great for me, gonna do it again. But also I was starting thinking this should be available. So in sort of a very undefined thing where sort of it should be available. But like as an entrepreneur, I think, which I still in my heart, like you always think about like how can things be available. Blah, blah, blah. It then took me though 3 years, and then another very spiritual like sort of thing. I had one more trip. I mean, I had more trips, but like there was this one trip. I never told that story, and I actually just recounted it with the same friends who did it always with me when we were again in Mexico actually this year over Christmas. And so we recounted the story. Is that 3 years? I think it was 3 years later. So for 3 years I was thinking about it, looking around, but the problem was that I still was very shy talking about it. So it was sort of, how do you find other like-minded people, whatever. And I had this one trip, and one sort of message, or call it revelation or whatever, on that trip was, because it is so beneficial, Christian, you should talk about it, at least with more friends. Like, you shouldn't be ashamed of it. It's nothing to be say, oh, I do magic mushrooms. I always add, because it's obviously a public thing, it's like it is still illegal in most countries. So you have to go to a country where it's legal, which they are, like in the Netherlands, in most parts of actually Latin America. And then one outcome was like, you talk about it, like be a little bit more outward going and try to find ways to bring this very powerful potential drug or medical drug to the people. And this when I started talking about it, and then I met actually a couple, George Goldsmith and Katya, who were thinking the same. They were in the same sort of finding phase, and that actually led then to the foundation of Compass, where I'm the seed investor. George, Katya, and then a third one, Lars Wilde, are the founders, and they were sort of the beginning of it, just like 4 years ago. Yeah. So it was a wild.
And I guess the logic behind Akai is to have a portfolio to do not just psilocybin, but also whatever, MDMA, acid, I don't know, 5-MeO-DMT, or
everything. So what happened is, like, so we started Compass first, So Compass Pathways is focusing on psilocybin, which is the ingredient, the active ingredient of magic mushrooms. And then when I realized, wow, there were even more psychedelics. You mentioned some MDMA, like DMT, all of that. And Compass wanted to focus on psilocybin. I was like, I think I want to explore from a business point of view also the rest. And this foundation of my psychedelics, it's called Holding a Tie. Compass is a part of it, but we have actually 12 more medical drugs in development, and most of them are psychedelic.
By the way, for disclosure for the audience, I am a small investor in Thai. Um, Question for you, because obviously I think that there are profound use cases that are medical, like for depression, etc. But you and I came at this frankly from curiosity and awe and spirituality, and I wonder if trying to limit it to the medical applications is actually not really limiting, because at the end of the day, that's not why you and I came to it. We weren't depressed. We're actually really happy. I'm a bit worried that, because I trying to recreate, and I'm sure you've read The Immortality Key, but like that kind of these essential original spiritual connections with maybe God, I guess, even though you can say it from an atheistic perspective as well, but like whatever. I think seems to be a fundamental use cases for psychedelics, and I worry that if we just put it in the medical component field, it's going to be rather more limited than it should be at large.
It's an amazing question, because it's also one of these extremely controversial questions, and I love it. Yeah, because no, because there are people, some maybe even watching, who say, "Oh, Christian is actually it's bad because we make a business out of a." And I totally agree. By the way, I'm the first person you can have a religious or spiritual discussions about in general, but about psychedelics. Yeah. And I don't see any conflict at all. I think it's a made up conflict, because if you look at what is it now, yeah. So in certain parts of the world, yeah, Latin America mainly, the Netherlands, whatever, you and I and other people who want to try it can do it. So there is no and I will not hinder that, because people are always like, what is a sub part of the questions you didn't ask, but like what is a lot of people are sort of not angry, but like uncomfortable with, is that in order to build up a business, we have to get patents around these drugs. So Compass Pathways has an enormously broad patent set on psilocybin. Yeah. But now comes the big but. If you do next time magic mushrooms in Mexico, and even if I would sit next to you, I would not say, "Oh, Fabrice, you need to pay royalty to me," because we don't have the patent on the natural magic mushroom. We have it as Compass on the synthetic version. So there is zero conflict. Yeah. And actually, I hope that because of our work on the medical side, these drugs will move from being in the Western world, in America and Europe, except the Netherlands, at the moment being illegal drugs. I hope they're going to move in the decriminalized pocket, because this is what they should be everywhere. They should be decriminalized, which means you and I could also do drugs in America, psilocybin in America, and not fear that this is now wrong.
Yeah, but decriminalize, I wonder if it's enough, because it still makes it hard to get the proper substance, right? Like if I want to take acid and it's illegal, even though it's decriminalized, I still need to source it from somewhere.
But now comes the important point, yeah? And you said it, and I think most people don't think about it enough. You and I came from an extremely privileged point of view, because you and I were happy. Yeah, you and I have the financial means to sit on a beach or in a nice place with the right people. And because this is one of the things people always underestimate, that psychedelics are extremely, interestingly, by the way, which makes them a very complex group of drugs, because set and setting, so the way you take them,
and intention,
and the intention, and the people who are with you, they make very, very big parts of the healing and the experience. That you would never have that with a cancer drug. If I give you a cancer drug, I don't need to have a nice and pleasant way. I can give it to you and it either works or not.
Well, the placebo effect probably plays a role, right? Like it's going to be a great drug for you.
True. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's definitely not as extreme as. So this is important. So we come from a very and we don't need it.
Yeah.
We maybe did it and we have a great experience with it, but we were not depressive. So if I look at the people who are really depressive, and I think that should be our number one priority, because
Totally agreed.
the numbers are insane. Like we have these hundreds of millions of people who really suffer. Yeah, they will not, by the way, by definition, if you're depressive, you're not going to go and say, hey, I'm doing magic mushrooms now. Yeah, you need and want a doctor next to you. Yeah, so that's a completely different world. And you also need to get it paid by your health insurance, because you might not have the money, yeah, to do it, and so on. So we shouldn't forget, as the ones who sort of have the passion and sort of the spiritual part of it, that we.
I agree, but I want to help the hundreds of millions who are depressed, but I want to open up the opportunity for billions to have these extraordinary, magical, beautiful spiritual experiences, and in a way that is not really available. And I'm not sure decriminalization is enough. Maybe perhaps, again, I'm not saying I'm not saying legalize completely, as in you can go buy it at the grocery store and you take it, and because then it's going to lead to massive car accidents and whatever. But
absolutely, exactly. But I think, by the way, these drugs, as much as I'm passionate about it, we should not take you and my experience, and I think this is the mistake a lot of activists do, and sort of extrapolate and say this is why everybody should do it. I think the net effect, if we just in a theoretical exercise would make these drugs available everywhere, it would actually have a net disastrous effect, because wrong setting, people, meaning you can get more miserable if you're coming from a dark place and you have no doctor next to you. So even, I give you the vision I have.
I hear it. Well, look, Aldous Huxley, I don't know if you've ever read The Doors of Perception.
Not yet.
So he totally agreed with you in terms of but he wanted only the elite to have access to it. It feels so elitist, right? Like it feels like we're depriving a lot of people, and that's just my concern. But do I think the base case? Let's start with helping the people that need it the most. Absolutely. But I wouldn't want to stop there. I guess is what I'm trying to say.
But think ahead. So I always come back to, like, I think we overestimate how many people would do it if it would be everywhere. Like, and I think maybe some would do it, have bad experience. So what I think is, like, it's a medical drug because it's such a strong experience. And by the way, also what I mentioned, if somebody thinks about it now, it's not always an easygoing experience.
Correct.
So my most valuable trips were actually what people would call a bad trip. I don't like the word, because a bad trip is not bad. It's very challenging, but it can lead, if you have the right guide, the right setting, a challenging trip can lead to something great, But what I'm saying is, like, we go for the people who medically need it, depression, anxiety, addiction. I think down the road, the question is, where does depression start? So, and a psychiatrist or a doctor, would maybe say to a client, you're not depressed, but maybe it helps you. But again, it's in a guided medical setting, because everybody who says, oh, these are nature drugs, forgets that this is it's very interesting. And because you read the Immortality Key, but like, just to say it, psychedelics throughout human history were not consumed in party setting. These were never party drugs. These were never recreational drugs. These were always spiritual and religious drugs, in actually exactly what we want them to be, a setting with a shaman, with a priest. And the shamans of our times are the psychotherapists. These are the people who take care of the mental health of people. And we want that these drugs come back in what they were for thousands of years, but that is actually a medical setting.
Two questions for you. So first, I look at my parents, and they'll consume large quantities of alcohol, which I think is extraordinarily unhealthy, and yet be extremely judgmental of the fact that I've done ayahuasca or acid or psilocybin. How do you? I mean, I don't know if there's any way to convince them that I'm correct. And by the way, that they're wrong, that they should stop consuming alcohol. And I don't know, have you dealt with that with your parents, for instance, or others around you, or like you're insane? And because by the way, this used to be very fringe. And people are like, in our world, it's becoming more common, but our world is still a tiny minority. It is still fringe. I mean, that's what I come to realize every day. Like, we are still in the tiny, tiny, tiny minority of thinking normally this is okay, this is fantastic. And yeah.
No, but exactly, again, I come back to it, just want to repeat it. This is why it's so important that we do it medically, because this is the only way to overcome the stigma, yeah, that not you and I, and maybe it helps a bit that you and I are passionate about it, but ultimately when Compass Pathways will come out next year, middle of next year with their phase 2b data, which, yeah, I don't know the details, but like we all are very hopeful because we know it works. Like when we come out with the other drugs with a tie, with the data, with the hard medical data, then this is a total different level of convincing, and then it is another level or basis where we can have these discussions on. And then it's a generation thing. Unfortunately, the negative campaign of politics in the 60s and 70s, who completely vilified these drugs, by the way, for pure political reasons. The only thing, if you wonder why these drugs are so vilified, it was just because the hippies took them. There was Vietnam War, whatever, and they wanted to make hippies look bad. This was a
They
pure
being Nixon.
Yeah, it was around Nixon, and then and there were so many sort of political things which they tied to into the use of psychedelics, and then said, "Oh, look at those people, what they're doing. Yeah, it's very bad." Blah, blah.
Well, the war on drugs has been a massive waste of money in general. I mean, even though I think cocaine, et cetera, or really bad things people should not take, the way we've been dealing with it is completely idiotic.
Yeah. So, but my hope is that we need data, and then once it's available in a medical setting, people will ease up. And coming to my parents, I tried it. I did succeed, at least with one of them. And I think it helped them a lot.
Meaning they took psychedelics. You succeeded in having them take it. Yes. Congratulations.
Yeah, I succeeded in taking it. So, and I think, by the way, that's also one other, how do you say in English, passion project. I think, meaning obviously Atai is dealing at the moment with the sort of defined mental health issues, anxiety, depression, addiction, PTSD, and so on. But I think we're going into a world which is extremely negative for our mental health. So there must be a reason, by the way, why, if you look at the numbers of depression, whatever, they all are rising almost, which is obviously not, but almost as if these diseases would be an infectious disease. So, and meaning my takeaway is the world we live in is just not good for our mental health.
And by the way, I think there's an easy way out of it, which is like, don't follow any news whatsoever. But like, people seem to be addicted to this like negativity.
Yeah, I mean, I think yes, I think it's easier said than done because our world is structured around it. Like it's meaning it. Obviously, you can say I put my phone away, but we're all addicted to it. Social media is extremely bad because we are always comparing ourselves to other people. But I go further. Like if I look at my parents, I think the world is turning, and you and I love that. That's our job. But I always think about like actually what I love is innovation and all of that. Most people are really frightened of, and it goes too quickly. But now, take my view. It's gonna accelerate. It's not gonna go slower. It's like gonna go exponentially. So the world we're living is changing every day, and I think 90%, to make a number up, of people, a high number of people, are actually feeling deeply uncomfortable with the change. And by the way, I think things like yesterday, where crazy people are storming your Senate, whatever, is just an expression. I mean, you can say it's a Trump level, but I think there is a level below. Why are these people going for the extremes? Because I think they're screaming, I don't feel comfortable anymore with the world I live in. Yeah. And maybe down the road with a medical backing, psychedelics can be a way to ease actually people into an ever-changing.
So what's your protocol? Like, do you microdose? Do you just do it once in a while, like once a year, twice a year? Is it more like opportunistically, like, oh, I'm at the right, like, oh, it feels right now? Have you tried others? Like, I don't know what you've tried other than psilocybin.
So I don't microdose. Maybe to answer that first, because I think it's an important view, because everybody is like easy and thinks microdosing, I don't feel anything. our view of microdosing is, first of all, we don't know enough.
Mm.
While taking a full trip of psilocybin, is maybe one of the most well-researched things at all. Like this is like in this, I mean, we have so much data from the 50s and 60s, and now we creating data, other universities we work with creating data. So I think we know a lot about it, let's say that way. While microdosing is very new, there is very little really like academic studies about microdosing. So that's the one thing. So we don't know enough. And if I look what it does, it gives you, you know, that as
Yeah.
psychedelics give you an emotional or like a spiritual, let's call it trip, but it also has a very tangible effect on your brain because you have neuroplasticity. So your brain, in simple ways, literally starts growing. But this is like a blank canvas. And then the question is, how do you fill that blank canvas? In a full trip, you have an amazing positive experience. And then the weeks after, you fill your sort of blank, you know what I mean? Like, so if you just microdose, you're creating neuroplasticity, but maybe you microdose when you're in a stressful time, and then it could actually be that negative sort of habits, whatever, rather increase than
Yeah, I tried to do
decrease.
an A/B test where I microdosed every day for a month, and I tried multiple protocols. I tried it with both LSD and psilocybin, and I tried the lion's mane, etc. And at the end of the day, I I didn't feel more creative, and sometimes I felt it didn't feel quite right, and so I decided it wasn't for me. I'd rather actually do full
So
doses in the right setting.
and I try to do it like once a year. I think interestingly, psychedelics are
You
also
mean the
these
full trip,
drugs
or you
where
mean the yeah?
a full trip, where they call you. I think like at the moment, I in the first time I did it more often, and then I realized I think I don't. I think I'm not. I mean, happy I was before, like, but I'm at the moment I'm in a place where I'm actually quite sort of satisfied with how I say what I know. So I don't have big deep
Hmm,
questions at the moment. So and I think psychedelics are, again, it's getting super spiritual and cheesy, but like I think you know when it's right
I
for
agree.
you. And when so they are teacher plants. I mean, again, I'm extremely against, but not in sort of a negative way. I just want to tell people that these are not party starters. This is not. I know I'm maybe upsetting some, but I even don't think it's the right thing at Burning Man, because it's like, it should. Meaning, I'm very
Actually,
in
I
the
disagree
ancient.
with that. My acid trips at Burning Man have been some of the most profound experiences of my life, and like it feels like you're reliving through time and history, and like you're kind of like this merger of the spiritual world and the physical world. I don't know. It's like it feels like actually it's been made. It was made for that, even though it doesn't have the
Okay,
intent and setting of a deep internal journey. It's an external one. That's why, by the way, I think acid is better there than mushrooms.
yeah. Maybe I have to say, and I know like I haven't been at Burning Man, so I'm seeing it from the outside, and I'm very in this sort of setting,
Mm,
spiritual, medical context. I just want to say, like, people shouldn't take it lightly. That's always
totally
what
agree.
I repeat, because I think they're way too important and positive to take them lightly
So,
on the go.
switching gears, I guess, in the interest of time, because we spent a lot of time on this.
Yeah,
So you're also investing in longevity, if I'm not mistaken. But I think, I guess, again, same thing. It used to be French to think, oh, aging is a disease. But David Sinclair, and I assume you've read his book Lifespan, has kind of made that more the norm. The thing is, if I take a step back, and because in the interest of time, I don't think we need to go through the history of it. But if I look at like the Aubrey de Greys and all the research, like people were saying, oh, we're going to increase our life expectancy dramatically, but like they were saying that 20 years ago. And if I look at like actually the advancements of the last 20 years, they've been rather de minimis, right? Like, and I worry that, the idea of, oh, if you live 20 more years, then you can live 20 more years, and you can live, and like I wonder to what extent we're actually making real progress against that. And I mean,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, for example, working with Aubrey, and I know David well. I think it was just very early, but we have to give them credit, because they were like bringing that on the sort of agenda. And my view in general, by the way, on biotech, this is not just on longevity, is that we're entering this golden age of biotech. I think biotech, for various reasons, is just like 10, 20 years delayed compared to tech. So everything we already saw in terms of innovation, but also exponential growth of technological innovation in tech is going to happen or is already about the next 10, 20 years in biotech. Yeah. The reason why it looks so delayed is because you have the FDA and you have in
Well, yeah, I
general.
was going to say it takes $1 billion to bring a drug to market, and it's so regulated, it can't be following exactly the same expenditure rule. It has to be a lot slower. No.
I think we just partly positively said, I think we just have the perception because not just the money, but because it takes longer. So if the drugs which are coming to market today are the drugs who were made 2000 or designed or 2010. Yeah. So think about now what the last 10 years happened in innovation. So it's just a little bit delayed because you have the approval process. By the way, costs are going down. Yeah, this is one of the beauties. Is this amazing Y Combinator article, who in 2008 called now the age of tech is coming because the auxiliary costs dropped back then. And exactly what happened in tech around 2008 is happening in biotech now. The cost of a genetic mouse minus, I don't know, 95%. The costs of sequencing your DNA like minus 99%. So it's not $1 billion anymore. Yeah, that's the good news. You actually get things done quicker and cheaper than ever before. So that's the positive. So I believe that the next 10, 20 years, everything Aubrey de Grey, whatever we're wishing for, is going to happen. This makes me super excited. By one side, because I had this discussion with a friend, and you will like it because you like ancient history. What is interesting is that we're living, and this is we need to change. We're living, interestingly, in an era where you and I love longevity, and you and I want to live very long. Yeah, I always say I don't think we want to live forever, but I want to call the end myself. This is the ultimate libertarian dream, to decide when you have enough.
And by the way, we would, even if we were immortal, quote unquote, we'd still die of like plane crashes or accidents,
exactly,
or et cetera. So your life expectancy would still be limited.
Exactly. So but what I'm saying is, like, a lot of people, at least at the beginning, when you talk to them and say, hey, I believe we're going to live hundreds of years, and they are like, I don't know if I want that. So somehow, actually, the wish of living forever became negative. And so I looked on the history, and what happened is, in the ancient times, the ancient Greeks and Romans, they glorified longevity, or actually immortality. So immortality was given just to the best. It were the demigods, it were the heroes, it were the lovers of the gods, like Ganymede, who was made immortal because Zeus fell in love with him. Yeah. So, and then when the Catholic Church came, they actually painted longevity negative. So suddenly we had vampires. Yeah. Oh, they live forever because they're bad, because whoever lives forever in the Catholic form, you're going to escape the judgment of God. So sort of we need to actually return the view on immortality to the classics, to say, hey, we will never be really immortal. Yeah, but like we need to get back the sort of appreciation, and not sort of this is dodgy. Yeah.
So I guess if you would say that the most fringe belief, because now today I suppose that our support of psychedelics is no longer fringe, is that we will live a lot longer than we expect, even us at our age alive today.
Yeah, I think that, or I expect that I will live that long that someone I say, now I had enough Christmases, enough birthdays. And I think this would change society in a way we cannot even comprehend at the moment.
Do you follow David Sinclair's fundamental protocol? Like, do you take metformin?
Yep, I take everything. I take 40 supplements and pills.
You haven't decided. But sometimes doing too much could increase probability of cancer. It could be actually negative, right? Like, you don't want to wait for the Thames study results to come back.
Which study?
Thames, right? They're giving metformin to healthy people for like 10 years to see what happens.
Well, I mean, first of all, I take one. It also has the nice side effect that you get a little bit slimmer. And I talked to all of my colleagues. So one of my colleague who runs, I have two longevity platform companies, and James
Yeah.
Pyre, he runs Campaign.
I'm an
You
investor
know,
in his company as well.
now, obviously, you know James. But like for the viewers who don't know James, who's an amazing human being and scientist and founder, and he's very involved in the metformin studies. So I took his takeaway. He's like, rather take it than not.
Okay.
That is sort of yeah. The only thing is really like I think this peak performance sport thing rather. And I'm not an athlete. Like I'm not competing for the Olympics where I'm like need to get the last 2% out of performance. So I think overall 1 or 2 metformins is good. But I also take everything else from David and like on and from others like NMN, NAD plus, curcumin, like a lot. James and I think you have it. Like we wrote these 11-pager of everything. By the way, and for all the ones who say now, oh, this will make you live forever. No, this is important because then people start mocking you and like, oh, you think because you take 40 pills a day, you're going to live forever. It's not about that. There is nothing at the moment which will give us these super life extension. It's all about, unfortunately, because I'm early 40s. So if I would be 5 or 10 or 15 years old, I would like, okay, it's gonna come every, but like we are in this sort of interim phase where we need to make sure that and it sounds funny, but like we can't die the next 20 years. Or the other way around, if we survive the next 20 years, then the sky is the limit. So everything I'm doing is to preventing the two things which are you and my biggest risk, which is, or 3 things. The one is cardiovascular diseases, the second one is cancer, and the third one is an accident. So if we don't have accident, cardiovascular, or cancer in the next 20 years, we're gonna still be here in 20 years, we're gonna have this call, and then we're gonna see innovation. We don't, and that's my regime is centered around that, how to avoid this.
So, question for you. I mean, we're saying costs are declining in biotech, and that's definitely true. And yet, every year it seems like the healthcare costs in the system are going up, and healthcare as a percentage of GDP keeps going up. Like, how do you reconcile the two, and can we fix it? Which probably leads to a greater conversation of like, how do we fix the broken, perhaps politics or even frankly policy making, where it's like ever more burdensome and ever more, I mean, the antithesis of like letting people innovate in the world at large, and what role do you and I want to play in that and in making that happen?
Well, it's such a complicated question. I would lie if I have an answer. I think the healthcare system, not drug development, and maybe even drug development has to be reformed, but I think the healthcare system at large is so messy, and I don't have a solution for it. Like it's like it is a problem. Like it's like meaning but it doesn't answer your question fully. In general, my view on systems, the question will then be how to make that. But like is you have to have a reset every 20 to 30 years. Yeah. So I'm very negative on any system or institution who runs longer than 20, 25 years, because it always becomes extremely bureaucratic. And by the way, there is not one person who's responsible. It's just like how systems tend to develop. Yeah. So I, for example, take, which was super controversial, I know, yeah, like between America and Trump and Europe is like the whole NATO thing. But that's a good example. I think the NATO came from the Cold War. We don't have a Cold War anymore, but we do have other challenges. But it seems to be that we cannot reform NATO because it became these bureaucratic monster, yeah, which just like consumes money. So we should close it down, but then the next day meet again and say on a blank canvas, how does a NATO 2.0 for the 21st century need to look like? And the same again, but it's not doable. I'm just like, but like in somehow we would need a complete reset for the healthcare system as well. So like stop it and say, how does it need to look like literally from scratch? Which by the way is one of these big problems, I think, sort of luxury problems, because if you look at humanity, normally wars created that big reset. Yeah. And luckily we came, I think, to a time where I personally hope that we're not going to have massive wars anymore, because we in a certain way positively evolved. But I think we're spending too little time on thinking and I want to get it right because it's a very controversial. So like, was there maybe a tiny bit of positive outcome,
Sure.
yeah, of this reset, and how can we get this positive reset without having the 99%
You
negative
could have laws that
aspects? Yeah,
expire, right? After 20 years, they
exactly.
sunset, or they need to be, or your
Yeah,
cost benefit analysis needs to be done, or something like that. Do you
yeah,
have 5 more minutes, or do you need me to end
yeah.
it?
I know. My plan changed. I'm
Okay, because
completely free.
I was like stressing that I'm because we haven't.
No, no. Sorry, I forgot to tell you. I was supposed to go with friends' children, which I'm super excited because I love animals, to the zoo. But we're doing that tomorrow.
Okay, well, I won't take too much more of your time, but maybe switching gears and talking about crypto for a few minutes. Um, the way I've seen crypto, especially Bitcoin, right? For me, and by the way, I'm an idiot because I was mining crypto in the early 2010s because I was a gamer and I have GPUs that were powerful. So before ASIC computers, and I had crypto, and I could have done way more with it than I've ever done. And but I see Bitcoin specifically as like digital gold. I mean, it's a store of value, and it's not really a means of exchange. So it's not a currency as much as it is a store of value, and because it's kind of inherently deflationary because of its structure. And yes, in a world of fiat currency devaluation, because people print, asset prices go up. But you don't necessarily need Bitcoin for that. That's true of biotech. That's true of tech. That's true of stocks. That's true of like kind of every asset class in the world right now seems to be in a bubble. So why, first of all, crypto, or why Bitcoin? And is there a use case today or in the near future beyond purely being a store of value? Because right now there's no applications in crypto other than crypto, essentially Bitcoin, frankly, from a mass market consumer basis. Right now we're still building the building blocks of crypto.
Okay. So first of all, by the way, I think the store of value function is enough to justify the success.
I totally
I
agree.
do think there will be more. So that's what, and I think it's interesting because like if you look at a store of value needs sort of this pop culture acceptance. And I was the last point where crypto could have, or Bitcoin, let's stay with Bitcoin, where Bitcoin could have failed from my point of view was the big downturn. Because if everybody had turned around and said, no, this is not a store of value, I'm going to walk away. But actually, I mean, I'm very happy about that, that sort of the next generation, I think especially the younger people, yeah, have a way better way to deal with volatility. We're like, oh, that's what it is. Like, but we believe in it fundamentally, and this is what we see now. That sort of it sort of is the same like gold for thousands of years. It sort of became part of our common sort of acceptance that this is a store of value. And I think that's a super. It's simple, but I think it's not to underestimate how much that means for Bitcoin. I do agree, though, meaning that's my whole sort of thesis for my next 10 years, that we are in this massive asset price inflation cycle. Yeah, and it's true for any good asset. So it's true for biotech. This is why I do a lot of biotech. It's true for tech. It's even for real estate. Meaning anything quality asset is better than holding cash and bonds. I think we're seeing the biggest wealth transfer from owners of cash, which my heart is bleeding because it's actually my fellow Germans. The Germans have trillions of euro cash savings, and they actually increase these cash savings. I think, I don't know if I have the right number, or something like more than 10% in the crisis. And I'm like, no.
By the way, that's true everywhere in the world, right? Like the savings rate in the US went from 5% to like 15% because there's nothing to spend money on. Like if you're locked in, you can't travel, you can't go to restaurants, you can't.
Well, I was thinking the US people maybe more buy stocks. Like maybe it's also.
No, I looked at the
massive.
savings rate. It went. I think it might have gone as high as 20%. Now it's down to like 10, but it's still double what it was prior to the crisis. Now, do I think there's going to be extravaganza where people party like there's no tomorrow when this is behind us? Yes.
Yes.
But I still worry that we're headed for a massive financial crisis because we are now in a everything bubble, like bubble in literally every asset class, essentially, because everything's overvalued because interest rates are zero. And massive levels of debt, and the wake up from that is going to be very painful.
Yes, so I'm trying always to. The risk is definitely there. On the other side, you could say in an interest rate world of zero, but especially also where I don't want to say the wrong number, but I don't know if it was the US or Europe, like where the sort of amount of money circulating, grew definitely double digit. And I think it was 48 or something. It was a crazy amount. I mean, if you print more money, let's say simplified said, if you print 50% more money, then assets can go up a lot, and then it's still equal. Like, I think so. It's not that again, and I don't want to. I'm very, very careful because I lived through various bubbles. I'm in sort of the business since 1998.
Yeah, likewise. My first company I built in '98.
So, and I think the most dangerous thing is to say now it's different. Yeah, but there is something different. I think we have never seen that amount of quantitative easing. And I think we have never seen that long time of low interest rates. And I don't think, by the way, interest rates will go up because, so what will come? I do think so we have this asset price inflation. I do think there will be consumer price inflation because people are going to spend after the COVID thing. But in the main things where we measure inflation, like in terms of will the iPhone get more expensive? No, actually, the other way around. Technological innovation is inherently deflationary. So this is why I think it could work out that we keep maybe interest rates going a little bit up. And you see that already, hard resources coming back, whatever. But maybe the balancing is softer positively than we fear.
It is possible to do macroeconomic balance, right? In the short term, deflationary risk probably is greater because there's so much unused capacity, like people stuck at home, stores closed, etc. So I actually think it makes sense to have a stimulus right now and to do quantitative easing. The question is, once things come back together, like trying to find that right balance requires a level of macroeconomic management that I'm not sure our policymakers have, right? Like in terms of like level of it, control, nuance, and intelligence, because I think they have an incentive to just print in good times and bad times.
No, but that's one of my other sort of, I would say, beliefs, or like my framework is that politicians and money printing is literally as bad as being on heroin. Yeah, this is so addictive because politicians were used to that. Meaning they go always the softest way. But I think till somehow 10 years ago, there was sort of this sort of wall where they said, okay, we can't do money printing because then they did it and there was no inflation. I think the big sort of change in mind was when they printed money in the 2008 and 2010 crisis in Europe, and then inflation didn't come. I think a lot of especially younger politicians are like, it seems to work. We can have the cake and eat it. We can make people happy. We don't need to raise taxes or so. And so I think whoever wins, Biden, whatever the Republicans come back, like the left and the right, they all gonna go on printing money because it's so easy. It's the nicest way to take money away from the people. So I would say at the end, my conclusion is there will be a lot of volatility. So, and the same, like when you look at this, the last year prices dropped 40-50%. This will come again because the more money is in the system, the more the instability is there. If I would have to bet, like from today to the year 2030, I think the overall theme to play is asset price inflation.
So you and I, so I'm switching gears again a little bit. So first of all, I agree, asset price inflation, and I'm not even sure we'll ever see CPI, like consumer price inflation, because of technology being deflationary. So totally agree. Asset price inflation is the macro general trend of the next decade. It has been, frankly, by the way, for the last 20 years. The next thing I want to talk about is, like, both you and I are fascinated by markets. I mean, I even though I was a computer programmer originally, like, I studied economics because to me it explained the way the world works and the incentive systems. And yet everything, like every day, they become more constrained, regulated, limited, and frankly, often people don't understand the secondary costs of these regulations, right? If you try to regulate big tech, it probably entrenches them as the dominant players, and the smaller players cannot innovate or cannot afford to meet the regulations. And I look at things, and the most shocking or striking to me is things like building, right? Like, it used to be we build the Golden Gate Bridge, like $2 billion in like a few years. We build the Empire State Building, $2 billion, and today's money, by the way, in a few years. And today the access route to it takes 10 years, costs tens of billions. Like we can't build anymore, and that's one example of like NIMBYism, local regulatory overreach. And people were all complaining, by the way, like, oh, real estate prices are insane in these cities. These cities are not building, and basic supply and demand. And so the question I have is, how do we try to bring in these market forces back in? How do we regulate the system? I mean, you said earlier we should do a reset of any system after 20 years, but how do we actually do that, barring war, revolution, etc.? Like you and I mean, the approach I've taken, frankly, is be in worlds that are not regulated at all, stay as far away from politics, regulation as I can be, because they make me miserable and they're not interesting, and they're zero sum games. And we live in a world of value creation and non zero sum game, and it's way more interesting intellectually and rewarding financially. And so, and frankly, rewarding at a macro level of like making the world a better place. But should we try to do something to change the underlying infrastructure? And if so, what? And what, if anything, are you doing or thinking about in that category?
Well, it's an amazing but like complicated question because I have no answer to it. Like, but at least we have the same thoughts. So, and sometimes you don't need to have the answer always, but just like at least start thinking about it. One hope I have, with also a big risk attached, is that if single countries constantly do it better, somewhen sort of the, let's call it envy between states, or sort of the, let's call it positive, the role model of some countries show or force the rest to get the act together, if that makes sense. Yeah. So this was always my big hope, which at the moment doesn't really look that way, is that Brexit's going to be amazing, because like the EU became these incredibly slow and bureaucratic monster. Yeah. Meaning, I don't know if you see it in America, all of my American friends are constantly complaining that the whole vaccination stuff is going too slow. Fact is, Europe is a disaster. Yeah. So, meaning, I think you could do better as well, but like the worst is Europe. The best seems to be Israel, but the UK is actually fairly good. Then the US, then Europe. And there was this whole drama with the Europe, because they couldn't. The whole thing is so bureaucratic. They ordered vaccines too low, too little. Anyway, so and I always was thinking, like, if the UK goes out and becomes that Singapore in front of Europe, then it forces Europe to like, oh, if the Brits can do it, we can do it. Yeah. So at the moment, I'm like, but like my hope is still, because
yeah, but the idea that the UK becomes Singapore is a nice one, but it felt for a while, frankly, if you had Corbyn, it would have been like Cuba without the sun, right? Like it doesn't need to go in the correct direction. I mean, you already have great examples. I mean, Estonia, if you wanted it, but the problem is that example has been around for 15 years. No one's copying Estonia, even though everything's kind of
you
open
need
source.
The bigger ones. You need the UK, like. So you can actually say, with all the problems attached, China is doing fairly well. China will, I think, be for the next 20, 30 years, one of the most important things to think about in general, very neutrally said. It's going to be one out of two mega factors for global politics. And it's such a different way of approaching things that it's at least putting the mirror in front of our face, let's say neutral, and say, look, this is how we do it. And then we need to come up with something better. So I hope that there will be a little bit like between startups, that there will be sort of a competition between countries. If it leads to a war, is obviously very bad, but maybe we can find that sort of competition in a non-violent way, but in a good way, and not like.
By the way, I suspect China is on the path to screwing it up, because it's not like Deng Xiaoping. I mean, Deng Xiaoping, I think, was massively enlightened and decided, okay, let's create these star free trade zones where we experiment on like everything from constitution to you name it, and it led to the China we know today. But Xi Jinping seems to be a much more centralized command and control type person. And not as liberal economically, for sure. I mean, none of them were liberal in the political sense than his predecessors. I mean, and what's happening with like Jack Ma and not wanting any criticism, et cetera. And frankly, I think they're trying to spruce up the state, the main state companies over the private companies. So I'm a bit worried that they're frankly falling for the failures of the Roman Empire of old, right? Where you had a great emperor, you do well, like Trajan or whatever, or Augustus, and you had a bad one and you do terribly, and which has always been the failing of the dictatorship. And it used to be, it was an oligarchy, even though you had a premier, but now it looks like it's a full on Xi Jinping, like all him all the time, and it doesn't seem to be that amazing.
I would say the call is out. I'm not a China expert at all. So I had some interactions with Chinese leadership. And I have to say, what impressed me, that on an individual basis, so if I judge the person, I was like, wow, that's a pretty amazing level. Because they actually, what you said like 30 minutes ago, is that sort of people like us or people like Elon Musk or whatever, who we would like to see to go into politics, but they don't, because we say, oh, this is not where we would be happy. Actually, China, let's say at least that they build up a system where best and the brightest might go to politics. Yeah, and that is impressive. So every single person I've met, including President Xi, is as an individual person, neutrally said, very, very, very impressive. Yeah. And so if I look at it like a company, they have at least a talent pool which is extremely competitive. And it's not just one person. So this is really like, I think we underestimate in the West how diverse the Communist Party is. So my view on China is that from the outside, we think it's a one-party model, which is true. Like, however, the people I know in the party, there are fractions, and they are always funnily saying, look, we kind of have parties, we call them factions, like a fraction, you know what I mean? Yeah, but within sort of the mothership. But like
I know it's not monolithic at all.
Exactly.
We've always had.
That's what I'm saying. So there is sort of, and I think it's very hard, and I don't want to pretend I know at all. I just, again, I'm drawing from individual experiences, which were actually very good. It's all I'm involved because I love politics. Is like I'm very involved in a thing called Munich Security Conference, which is like a big think tank and platform for. Anyway, so what I'm saying is like it's not monolithic. I think it's way not as sort of put on the one person as we might see from the outside. I think it's very hard to see from the outside how it really is. I think it's sort of a black box, yeah. But I think at least it's a very neutral or open question, like where this will go. And again, if I come back to competition, whatever it goes, hopefully it is a positive competition for us in the West. Yeah, we need to realize that we screwed it up a lot in politics, on any level. I mean, the saddest I think is like when I grew up, I thought that yesterday for a European, meaning I still, by the way, meaning I don't want to say again, I'm 42, I'm happy, but like I always tell you how old I am if you talk to a 20-year-old. Like when I grew up, when I was 7 years old, I remember that there were still American troops, not just in in the building where they lived. No, they were doing exercises every year. So in my countryside, where a 7-year-old Christian was, like a 5-year, 6-year, 7-year-old, every year there was an exercise because it was during the Cold War, and I was living right at the border. So the border to the Czech Republic was 10 kilometers away. So America for us back then was always these amazingly desirable country, like the culture, the music, whatever. And somehow we, the West, America, is not desirable at all. Meaning the picture we project, it's very sad because if you think about, because I very, very, very much believe in Western values. Like I think where do I want to live? I want to live in Europe or in America. Like I love it, yeah. But I think that answer, oh yes, I want to live in America, is not so easily answered by the majority of the people in the world anymore than it was 20 years ago. And we somehow need to get back these sort of desirability, and the only way is to get back our values, all of that. But
look, I follow the American dream, right? Like I was the little Fabrice was in France and in high school in Nice, but like I'd seen Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and what was possible in the US and seemed frankly impossible in France, especially in the 80s and 90s. And I went to the US to pursue the American dream, which I'm still living to this day. but it feels harder. And frankly, the U.S. has become so anti-immigration, it is harder actually to actually pursue that dream. But
But also, I want to say one thing, because obviously, if we had these very crazy and bad things happening yesterday, but I think we would make it too easy if now the entire West is saying Trump ruined it. Yeah, because then we have a scapegoat, but we're not going to the root what really is wrong. Because I mean, you can take so many things where I think the left and right, or it's not even left and right. Like my favorite example, negative one, is if you look at Hollywood.
mm,
Yeah, in the 80s and 90s, anything, both the American way of life, but also like tech, what we're doing, like meaning that meaning Star Trek. Star Trek was great. Like it was, hey, yes, there are wars, whatever, but like in generally, the theme of Star
is
Trek
optimism.
was is optimism. We going out, we're bringing the values of the Federation, yeah. And somewhere around 2000, complete Hollywood, and I'm sad about that. I never financed any of these movies. Switched into tech is bad, AI is bad, biotech is bad, everything is bad, America is bad. So we're talking ourselves down, which is
Oh no!
so.
Look, I think it's the political discord has become acrimonious for a long, long time. I think Trump exacerbated it, but it was already problematic, and frankly, like the inability to get real positive reform done, the scleroticism in the system as well, and like what it's kind of endemic corruption through lobbying and regulatory capture, et cetera. Like, and frankly, and at the same time, overregulation. It's been around for a long time. I don't know how we fix it though. And by the way, on China, I'm also super optimistic. I mean, I studied at Beijing Normal University. I could actually very well see China ultimately becoming democratic, or a form of democracy, in the sense that they've allowed entrepreneurs in the Communist Party, and at some point, and historically, it's been like 15K GDP per capita. You don't want taxation without representation. And that's when you started seeing, so factions being created, but ultimately in South Korea and in Taiwan, you saw transition to democracy. Now, partly will have a very different form. It will be more, oligopolistic than the West. But I'm actually even profoundly optimistic. But do I think the West should refine its way? And absolutely. But I don't see an easy way out. Like, there's no reset.
Yeah, maybe just one tiny thought, and I know it's a very politically incorrect one. By the way, the only thing I forgot is that I moved places in the house where I have no battery. I'm not charging, so I think we have another 5-10 minutes. If not, I would need to pick the charger.
No, but that's fine. I think we'll be done in 10 minutes.
But one thing is, like, I think we almost overstretched in the West the emphasis we put on the individual. I think if you go back in history, and again, as we said before, I love history in general and historical context. Like, so I think the great thing of the West was Enlightenment, where we went from the individual is nothing to the individual is super important. And I think everything almost, I would say, till 2000, roundabout 2010, maybe 2000, was amazing, because we were still pushing sort of the boundaries, or we were still defining freedom for the individual and minorities, whatever. And I always say, like, I'm gay. Yeah, I was sort of growing up at the right time. I was jokingly saying it was still special, because I always was happy that I'm different, but it was not. I wouldn't have liked to be gay in the 50s.
Yeah.
So I think it's all great, but we somewhere overreached it. I think somewhere was a point where we should think, yes, we got all the freedoms for the individual, but it's also important that the community flourishes. So China, you could say, puts too much of emphasis on the community and too little on it. It's one of the thoughts.
I'm going to have a contrarian thought here. I would argue that we are actually starting to restrict individual rights in the West dramatically, and we've become fundamentally illiberal. It feels like there's a thought police today. There are things that are taboo and cannot be said. It used to be that you could think or say anything, and now we have, like, my microaggression, and like, there are things that even having the person be there or talk about something is supposedly so controversial. I think that's fundamentally illiberal, and actually that's done in the name of the community. So I don't know. I worry, if anything, we're going the other direction.
Yeah, but funnily, you're totally right. That's the problem I see. But I think it's coming out of at least the shallow thing. Oh, we sort of always make it more individual, and but it finally backfired and totally makes it sort of less. I do agree with you. I mean, it's not even it's not contrarian what I said. I think we mean the same, and I maybe just sort of said it differently. But I do. I mean, it's my I'm I think political correctness, at least in the form we define it now, with executives say, "Oh, we can't read certain books at university because there might be a trigger warning." Get your shit together. Like I think maybe no, and then people say, "Oh, if I say that, oh, you can say that because you're rich and blah blah blah." And I was growing up in a basic environment. I was gay, but it was not cool to be gay, and it was also not nice to be gay. But it made me because I took it and I was like, it's still me. And like, you have to have your fights. Like life is not, it's not always easy. It's the question how you deal with the fights, yeah, and not to avoid them. Yeah. So anyway, so I'm really like, that's one of those things. Maybe then I always reading these quotes. I don't know which. There was one philosopher. I don't know if it was Socrates who practically said this sentence about the youth is completely insane and whatever, and the world's gonna end. And then you see that always one generation thinks that about the next one, and it's
Absolutely.
going on in our way. So maybe we also over dramatizing, but like again,
No, no, look, I'm profoundly optimistic. Actually, I actually think
yeah,
technology is going to solve both climate change and social injustice and inequality. Its deflationary aspect and its inclusive aspect, it increases access to things and people that we're discriminating against is actually the solution to the answer to the extent we don't get regulated away. And I think eventually, even they try to, they won't succeed because it's like such a massive tidal wave of history. That's why I'm in tech. I think we can actually solve the world's problems. And it sounds like
totally agree.
arrogant, and to say that or narcissistic or whatever, but like I truly, really believe that we are making the world a better place. And
Yeah,
yeah, and people don't believe it, but yeah, I guess it doesn't matter.
yeah, no, yeah, 100% agree. Full stop. Like, yeah, and hopefully people. Again, the only thing is we need to work on our self-marketing. I was so sad because it was a great movie. There was this Charlize Theron movie, The Old Guard, on
Mm,
Netflix. Yeah, great
I saw
movie.
it.
I love fantasy. Yeah, so I love fantasy. Da, da, da. And then the bad guy is practically a biotech guy who wants to make people live forever. And I'm like, this is not the bad guy. And it, meaning knowing a little bit how the movie was great, but like that point, they had to then put in scenes which deliberately made this guy look bad because his general thing is not so unlikable, but they needed to have these antagonists, which I think is weird. Why do you
No, no,
have a
I
guy who
look at
wants
Black
to
Panther. The bad guy is the guy who wants to open up society, etc. And then at the end of the day, and help the world. And then at the end of the day, what do they do? Exactly that. I'm like, wait a minute. So they make him be a bad guy,
yes.
even though he wasn't really a bad guy. I mean, it's really odd.
So that's one of my things, by the way. I mean, unfortunately, movie business is very complicated, but I'm like, I should do more movies and push a little bit more like these positive agenda because I think you can do great and still exciting. Like, and movies need to have an antagonist, whatever. But I think you can do better in sci-fi and fantasy than
Yeah,
always
let's have a
put.
dream. Let's make people dream again. Let's have a new Star
Yes,
Trek, right?
yeah,
And
totally.
by the way, most of what
Well,
I read, I mean, obviously I read Lifespan and Why We Sleep and whatever the Mortality Key, but I most of what I read is sci-fi and fantasy. I mean,
yeah.
it's fun.
Me
It's
too. And
amazing.
the only way for me to relax is reading young adult sci-fi and fantasy.
Yeah, me
I'm
too.
very, very cheesy because I don't want to do it. I don't want to read about politics. I don't want to read about things which I have my whole day, which I'm doing anyway. So when I really
Yeah.
relax, and funnily, I have some of my best friends and close friends. And this is a fun anecdote, and I'm just always worried that so the two friends who brought me. I think I shouldn't say it because it's like I'm just like I need to rephrase it a little bit because like but like the two friends who brought me on psychedelics and I'm sure they're gonna watch that. One of them is a very famous actor and he was actually one of the lead characters in a Disney show.
You ran out of batteries.
I should have gone like hopefully can we go on with the recording?
Yeah. It retakes immediately from where you disconnected. In fact, I'll edit it for the YouTube. I'll cut where you cut out. I'll put it back in. It won't be an issue.
Okay, super. So I want to say so my friend actor in one of my favorite Disney shows And he was the one who brought me. I mean, I met him because I was open enough. By the way, one other thing, I think we always be open. I was never afraid of saying, "Oh, I like teeny fantasy." So friends of mine in the movie business knew that I liked the show, and they were like, "Oh, you need to meet him." And we became super close friends, one of my best friends. And then he brought me on psychedelics. Yeah, so that's the fun thing, how fantasy passion leads to
But I think it also
psychedelics.
goes to, let's be, and we kind of touched on it, but like being open to the world. Like I say, I kind of, my life is an open book. Like I say what I mean what I say. Like there's nothing that's like really hidden, and from belief systems to lifestyle to you name it. And I think being open and living without fear, because it's who you are. It's like if you're true to your authentic self, it shows, and people and respect that,
Yeah.
even if you're out of the norm. Now, it probably again in the 1950s, someone like Alan Turing, was really castigated for personal life choices. So I'm glad we don't live in that time and day and age. But today, I think, yeah, there's no reason not to be open. Like you don't need to go and dress weirdly at Burning Man. Just dress weirdly every day. Who cares?
But I want to take, because I think that's one of the things I personally I thought I should sort of talk more, because I think younger people are like going through issues and then they look sort of for answers. Like I think it's both. I think you should not be afraid who you are, but you also can sort of a little bit make smart decisions, not shout it out at the wrong time. So, for example, going back, I always knew I'm gay. I was actually always fine with it. But then I looked around in the environment I grew up, and I was like, that's not going to be good here. Like, it's not going to be easy. And why do that fight? So I didn't have that sort of urge to shout it out. Yeah. But I also didn't have a problem with it. I was just telling myself in high school, I was like, let's put that aside for a second. Let's finish high school and let's move away, but not in a bad way. Let's go. So it was, you know what I mean? It's a little bit like being true to yourself, but also being pragmatic and not, yeah. And by the way, again, it's sort of so much going a little bit to destiny or to how things happen. Like it so much shaped me because I didn't have a girlfriend, obviously, in high school. Yeah. And I didn't have a boyfriend because I was not out. And it was so small, there were not really options, to say that. Yeah. So, but this was the reason why I did other stuff. So when other kids were drinking, partying, dating, I was a bit of a partying, but I was mainly also focusing on science, on history. I was just a nerd. Yeah. But I wouldn't sit here with you if this wouldn't have been my first days of my professional career. Like, so
our backgrounds are so eerily similar. It's shocking. I was so good at studying and at being number one in school, and it's not even for like, oh, you got the best grades. Like I loved it. Like I would read for fun. I would study for fun, and I was so good at it. And I was also very shy and introverted, etc. And as a result, I didn't have my first girlfriend until I was 27, right? Like in this day and age, it seems like insane, especially when you live in a city like New York or whatever. But I loved what I was doing. I had a sense of manifest destiny that came. I can't even tell you where it came from, but I was like, I'm going to change the world, and I know exactly what I need to be doing and when I need to be doing it, and I just pursued it. Now, of course, after the bubble burst in 2001, I had an interesting day of reckoning of like, right time, right place, right skills, and I lost it, and I didn't make it, and what next? And it took soul searching to decide, oh, well, you know what? I didn't do this to make money. I did this because I love doing this, and this is my destiny, regardless of even if it's a tiny thing. Turns out it wasn't a tiny thing, but in 2001, it looked like it might be a tiny thing. But yeah, I delayed. If, like you, no regrets. If I had like gone out and partied or had a girlfriend or and not been as studious and not started building companies so young, and the first big venture back company I built, I was 23, but like I started building companies, in my teens, early teens, mid teens, and I wouldn't be where I am today. And so I was like, I can't, there's zero regrets,
Yeah, totally. And I think that's my whole sort of belief system. I think things always happen for a reason, even bad things. Yeah. You might not be able to see that when they happen. Yeah. But if you have sort of the confidence or the trust this sort of positive attitude. Yeah, meaning actually, the worst things which in business, like big losses, and
Yeah.
when you know that as an entrepreneur and investor, you have bad times. Like it's not like a linear growth. It's like so. But even in the worst times, they were shit. Like I was like, it's not. I don't want to sugarcoat it. Yeah. But like the only thing which made me going, which was hindsight the best, was like that I deeply down believe, although it's not fun at all, there must be something good in it,
Yeah.
because that's how I think the world works. You just need to find it and go on with, yeah. And it always worked out. Meaning that's would be another hour
But
of
the
things.
problem is we are the examples of it worked out. I think there are a lot of people for whom it didn't work out. And so the problem is like, and we're in the frankly, we're in the 0.001%. And so I worry a little bit about that as well sometimes. But that said, I am very grateful, for instance, that I almost made like whatever, $120 million when I was 24. I think, and I was really, it's funny because today people sometimes think I'm arrogant. I actually don't think so. I think I'm confident. I know I know who I am and what I want. And I think people have a tendency to confuse that with either narcissism and or arrogance. But then I really was. I was like full of myself. And I think I would have been an arrogant prick.
We all made the mistake.
Yeah, I would have been an arrogant prick. Like if I'd made that much money that young, and probably wouldn't have known, really how to direct it and what to do with it. And so the fact that I made money not at 24, but at 29, was actually way better from that perspective. And also having eaten the humble pie, right? Like having gone from hero to zero very publicly, I think helps you also realize, oh, you're not all that you think you are.
Totally. Yeah, I do agree with the hindsight bias but I try to always analyze is maybe too much, but like look around even in other themes, because obviously in a tech podcast we talk a lot about success in terms of money, but like people do have other forms of success.
Absolutely.
And again, I do, by the way, believe that you need to feel deep down what is the success, the kind of success you like in life. And it might be people say, I want a family, I want an academic career. And one thing I'm very proud of to say that first is that I think I have an extremely diverse group of friends. So I do have friends in our business, like tech, finance, but like I still have three really, really, really close friends out of my childhood and high school. Yeah, I have a lot of friends who are in entertainment. And I always say what I like is that I think all of my friends have one thing in common in what they want to be successful in, and that can be like an amazing mom, like a very close friend out of my high school time. She's not just an awesome mom, yeah, but like that is success because that's what she defines as was. But I think I have inspiring, successful people around me, and they all have these common trait that they went to bad stuff in their stuff. You can go through bad times in marriage, and you can either break or you can say, hey, I sort of work with it. You can go, if you're an artist, you can have any. So although I can't prove it, yeah, I do think that sort of this positivity is sort of. My favorite book is the two things: The Law of Attraction on the spiritual side, and then from Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich, which has these sort of very cocky title because it feels like as it's just about money, but it's actually in general about success. Yeah, and again, whatever you define success, and there seems to be that sort of repeating pattern in successful people. Again, not limited to money.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think people overly define success by financial means. And by the way, for me, success in tech is actually not having successful exits. It's actually building companies that actually have a positive impact in the world, usually because they're deflationary and because they improve user experiences.
Yeah. Yeah, and have great products, great brands, whatever you define of, you can be proud of.
And you said something earlier I want to touch upon for 1 minute. You said something where like film is so hard, but you love it, or like what's so hard about it? Like, if you're an executive producer, don't you just like people pitch you projects and you fund them, or like I'm not sure exactly what role you play in film, because I love film as well. I've never done anything on the like I've never invested in film. I just consumed them.
Well, I mean, so where do we start? So I would say I did all the intensity from like just funding a movie up to really producing stuff, like being like more involved. Like, for example, I had several books. Hector and the Search for Happiness was one of the things where I loved the book so much.
Mm.
So I really developed it with colleagues from zero, like from buying the book rights, commissioning the script. So there I was a real producer. Yeah. And I think the good and the sort of problematic part of the movie industry is that most players in it are in it for because they love the creativity, which is the very nice part of it. But like, if you look at businesses neutrally, then the aim of making money, yeah, is sort of a driver which disciplines most sectors. So there's little sector where people really completely disregard making money. So in the movie business, it's very unstructured in a certain way. Yeah. And a lot of players, including myself, like I'm sort of like, are in it not just for making money, which sort of can be a little bit like messing up the process, how things come together. It's very, very unstructured.
No, that makes sense. So maybe to finish, like two things. A, do you have a question for me or questions for me? And then two, if do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with the audience or anything we haven't addressed or covered that we should cover or should be known, or something on your mind of late that's kind of like the equivalent of the fringe thinking you had with psychedelics 5 years ago, but is currently on your mind, or whatever. Or it could be about anything that we haven't covered.
Well, first of all, funnily, like we really, and again, I'm not saying that now because people might, because but it's the first real discussion we have. Like we knew each other, but like we not knew each other. Like so funnily, you're so similar that I really think like I know everything. Like I think I know how you're thinking. Like the meaning because we're doing the same job, the question would be like to you, like what is the most amazing, non-obvious or not sort of what is sort of the new thing? Like it's very hard. You know what I mean? Like the next psychedelics, the next Bitcoin, the next crazy thing, which still sounds maybe crazy, but you think it's gonna become sort of an investable business company. I tell you what I would answer for that question.
So I'm interested in platform shifts, right? Or platform changes. I think, or actually, I'm interested. A few things really interested in. I'm interested in when the marginal cost of something goes to zero, that it stops being measured, and then it becomes so abundant that you can waste it, and like the creativity that comes of that. And we saw that with processing power. We saw that with storage, right? And so now you have these supercomputers in your pocket, and whereas 40 years ago you needed a book time on a computer to use it, and you'd only use it for the most expensive applications. Today you're whatever, playing video games or playing Roblox or doing TikTok videos. I suspect this is going to happen in a few fields. I think a combination of autonomy and drones will mean that the marginal cost of delivery will be zero. And when the marginal cost of delivery becomes zero, I think it has a lot of implications. Like I think food delivery, which currently in a way it's marginal, especially if you add like dark kitchens, will probably become the vast majority of food ordered. You're going to have high quality organic food that could be whatever you want, paleo, keto, etc., delivered for less than would make it yourself. And so it's going to become and so we're still at the very beginning of the food delivery, food ordering revolution. But I think zero cost, marginal cost delivery probably means probably you'll have a fridge, but maybe you don't have a kitchen at home, right? So fundamental societal changes. If the marginal cost of the mile becomes zero because of electric cars and autonomy, what does it mean for, I don't know, you probably no longer have gas stations, which means you no longer have 7-Elevens. You no longer have parking spaces, and these maybe become dark kitchens. So there's a lot of societal changes. The thing is, when do these things happen, become investable? The other two big platform changes I think about where the marginal cost is going to zero. So one is, to me, delivery costs go to zero because of density and autonomy. And autonomy is not just self-driving vehicles. The second one is electricity goes to zero because of solar and maybe fusion. But solar is already at 1.6 cents per kilowatt per hour in the latest tender in Saudi Arabia. It's been declining 11% a year every year for the last 40 years. It keeps declining. And at some point, when storage reaches a point where it's cheap enough, everything becomes solar. But I think to the point where the marginal cost of electricity is zero. And if that's true, then what do you do with this electricity? Well, you can desalinate salt water, and you have infinite fresh water, the Peter Diamandis, type of projections, or you have vertical farms, or you grow crops in the desert, and food becomes abundant. And a lot of the constraints in society disappear, which leads, and the second order impact are greater than the first order impact. It's not just, oh, electricity is cheaper, great. It's actually, you can do so many things with it as a result. And the third big platform change that I see is going from having limited interfaces where we're like typing at whatever 50 words a minute on these things, to thinking about them, not having a screen that's where we're hunched over, but like having augmented reality, probably lasers right in our retina or intelligent contact lenses, where you can actually increase throughput dramatically and have the equivalent of telepathy. Now, these three things, first of all, you and I probably think those are okay and will happen. Most people will tell you this is crazy. I mean, that's the problem. Is like, if I tell my mom that I think I'm going to be able to send a thought to her head through mind reading plus AR devices, she thinks I'm crazy. But it's bound to happen. The question is when, and are they investable? And for all three, I'm not sure they're investable today. I think all three may be 10, 15 years in the future. Sorry, your turn.
No, I love it. The first two is really like super new in terms of you brought it extremely well across. The third one would have been mine, so you took away my one, because I actually, and I'm gonna announce it soon. I found like one of the few, and there definitely are some others, but like this whole brain computer interface stuff, because that's the basis for telepathy. I'm super excited. I think that's the next. So in general, meaning that's sort of the extension of psychedelics, is like, I think we focused the last 50 years so much on our body, and now we start understanding the brain. And with understanding the brain, we're gonna make sort of things possible which sound like magic or whatever, but like the merger of brain and computer will
it be invasive or non-invasive? Like, could it just be electrodes on my head, or do you need surgery?
I think you need most likely tiny implants, which will be so easy.
Yeah.
It's kind of surgery, but maybe this is constantly evolving. My guess would be that you still, for the very crazy stuff, let's say it that way, if you really want to think about an email and dictate it to the computer, I think you will need to go to certain parts of your brain.
How many years away from that are we, do you think?
For a practical application, meaning there are, by the way, amazing individual examples where people were so desperate because they were paralyzed from here that they took a risk. Maybe for them it's worth taking, not for the majority. But I think we are like 7 to 10 years away from mass applications for computer brain interface.
Yeah, that's my thinking as well. And by the way, in my world,
and it's not long.
It's not super investable. No, it's not long, but most of the timelines in venture, right? If you have I'm like you. I mean, I'm more of a family office masquerading as a fund. Like a third of the money is mine in my funds. But for most funds, right, most VCs, they have a 10-year life. They deploy over 3 years, and they expect your exits in 6-7 years. If it starts coming to market in 7 years, it doesn't work. I mean, I'm in synthetic biology and stuff like that, and flying air. I do electric flying vehicles, but like that's not traditionally investable.
Yeah, but I agree. I would say this is why I love my setup, exactly because I can do that stuff. When I did, by the way, psychedelics, meaning everybody, and it's just 4 years ago. First of all, sometimes because we're in this exponential phase, I think then things will be even faster than you and I think. Yeah. So
I hope you're right.
Let's see. Yeah. So in psychedelics, it was definitely faster. And when I started investing in psychedelics, literally everybody, except of a few friends, a big shout out to Mike Novogratz and Peter Thiel. These were the only two guys who said, Christian, I think even they said you might be a little bit crazy, but like we trust you, which I really, really appreciate. Yeah. The rest, like either thought it's crazy or they couldn't do it because all the funds, they were like, yeah, what is it? Like, do I have to go to my LPs? Is it like legal? Like, and all of that stuff. And meaning the entire fund industry missed sort of the psychedelics. In that time, it was really like IRR wise interesting to invest. And I think the same is coming for other stuff. You need to have goals, and and the passion. So but the brain stuff I think is gonna be. Meaning again, and I think a lot of people will watch now and say, Jesus, like that's frightening, yeah, because I think, and by the way, funnily on the one side with, and there is I can't talk about it now, but it's gonna be a very cool thing we're gonna announce with some people you already mentioned in the podcast, because the more I think we're gonna work and explore our brain, the more I want to know actually where we're coming from. So I want to put money and my own energy also in more explore, like what Brian Murarescu did with the immortality key. Where
Sure.
do psychedelics come from? Because just when we know where we as humans come from, then we can, I think, manage sort of the next step of human evolution. And I very much think that we are in front of a leap in human evolution. And because it will be artificially designed and it's not coming by natural Darwinism, so to say, it's going to happen right in front of our eyes. And I think that's going to be crazy, but if we handle it right, it's going to be super exciting.
Yeah, look,
I think
many people worry about it because you're going to have a combination of genetic engineering in a way, if you want, and so people worry about eugenism of some form and biotech implants, right? Like, so you're going to become both kind of a hybrid, if you want, and you can improve, and you can choose your genes, right? You can say, oh, I only want genes for intelligence or this or that, and so the combination of the two is going to be extremely powerful, and what Homo sapiens sapiens becomes out of that. And how we prevent, I make it widely available and make sure people don't, fight wars over it will be really interesting.
But this is totally, that's why I said we need to get it right. But I think it's a potential super exciting opportunity, and I think we get it right. So one thing, again, I don't want to spill because like we're still in like the fire, but like I think we need to really work on and because meaning how do I say, like we don't think enough. I think what makes us really human, because it's like a given. Like we assume that humans are humans since 10, 20,000 years. But like so I'm actually financing a lot of science stuff at the moment. What is really human? Because I think on the one side I want to upgrade, so to say, but I want to stay human. Like, and I think that would be one of the big philosophical discussions. How do, and it's gonna come, because I think I'm in the camp that whatever is technologically possible will happen.
Exactly. If something can be done, it will be done. Even if we regulate it, someone will not. And so
so we need to make sure that it's going to be good for humanity and that we keep our human side. So I think all of that is going to be a huge sort of theme for myself, but I think in generally, like in the next 10 years.
I think that'll be super fun, and probably unless you have any last thoughts, I think it's a good endpoint.
I think that was a good endpoint. I think it was amazing. Yeah, hopefully people liked it. We should do that again somewhere every 1 or 2 years, check in what's happening with the project.
I totally agree. Well, and frankly, I think I've learned we should need to hang out way more. Like, I don't understand why have we, like, we were in the same circles, like Dialogue and Peter Thiel, etc., and yet we never actually sat down and had a conversation. And so
because we always was at busy conferences. Yeah, that's finally a positive thing of this whole lockdown. You have more conversations, interesting even over Zoom, and after that all is over, I want to be in New York more often, or wherever you are.
Turks and Caicos, New York, and if I come to London, I'll ping you, because we definitely need to compare notes on a billion things.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you for joining, and
amazing. Thank you.
And I'm sure I'll see you around.
Cool. Super. Thank you. Bye-bye.